I am taking the time to go over what we know about the available COVID-19 vaccine. I wanted to kind of go through the process that the vaccines have gone through in order to be granted approval for emergency use authorization, kind of address some of those safety concerns that people have, as well as get into some of the precautions about getting the vaccine, about who can get it, and what we know and what we don't know. So I'm going to just work through some of these slides. It's kind of meant for everybody. Some of it might be a little technical, but I think everybody can benefit from hearing this. So, how does a new vaccine get approved for use? All vaccines, when they're developed, go through a process of research and development. They might start off with animal models, but they go through these different phase trials, the phase 1 trial, phase 2 trial, phase 3 trial. Phase 1 trials involve a small number of people. That's where they take a vaccine candidate and they determine, is it safe? Does it give immune response? Can you see antibodies that you think are going to be protective? Are there any serious side effects? What are the different doses? What seems to be the dose that works the best and is tolerated the best? Phase 2 trials kind of build on that, where there's several hundred volunteers, and again, looking at the most common short-term side effects. And again, how is their immune system responding to the vaccine? Do we think it would be protective? And then there's the phase 3 trial. That's the big trial where you really get an idea of if the vaccine is safe and effective. So it's the proof is in the pudding. Phase 3 is the pudding. And that's the important trial that you can't shorten that, and you can't make that any less than what it needs to be to have the power that is necessary to show that the vaccine is safe and effective. So that involves thousands of volunteers who get the vaccine. It includes, half the group get the vaccine, half the group don't get the vaccine. You watch and see what happens over time, and you record any potential side effects or adverse effects they have to see if there's differences. You also look to see who gets sick and who doesn't get sick, and you can see, is there signs that the vaccine is effective at reducing your risk of disease. And once they look at that data, then the FDA grants a license or an emergency use authorization to use the vaccine. And this is what all vaccines go through, and what the current COVID vaccines are going through as well, just in a quicker fashion. So how did they do it in 11 months? If on the other slide I showed you, typically it takes 10 to 15 years for a vaccine product to go through the research and development and the trials to get approval and to get marketed and to actually be available for use. So how did they do it in 11 months? It was 11 months ago that the researchers sequenced the entire genome of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and shared it with the world. And with that, different companies took that information and kind of ran with it. So how did we get here? Well, it's become a singular focus of the world. We have over 100 companies who've been interested in looking at developing a vaccine. So there are many, many candidate vaccines out there. You have a lot of people in the private industries who are devoting a lot of time to develop a vaccine that's safe and effective. Furthermore, and most importantly, a lot of this effort has been funded. It's been funded by the World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, but also the US government. So they've taken the risk out of the vaccine development. So typically in producing a vaccine, companies are going to kind of go through each phase one at a time. They're not going to invest the money necessary and the time necessary to do the next phase unless the first phase previous looks good, right? So in this instance, they were able to combine and even do phase 2 at the same time as phase 3. And at the same time as they were starting the phase 3 trials, they were producing and stockpiling vaccines so that as soon as an emergency use authorization was given, it could be rolled out. How could they do that? Well, they had a guaranteed purchaser, the US government, who said, we will pay for this. We will buy the vaccine. If it's no good and it can't be used in humans, then it's your tax dollars that are wasted So taking the risk out of it for the manufacturers certainly spurred things along. But again, the phase 3 trials that you need to do and you need to do properly have been done. So to go over a little bit of how these vaccines are developed, here's a little animated picture of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Just to kind of show everyone, you have this spike protein. Most all the vaccines really target that. That spike protein is the covering of the virus that gives it its name, the crown, the corona, and the target is to get antibodies against that spike protein are felt to be protective. And the virus itself is a single-stranded RNA virus, so the inside you just have a whole bunch of single strand of RNA, not DNA, and there's some 4 major structural proteins that are involved and important in disease transmission in antibodies. But again, the one that is really the focus of the vaccines are these spike proteins. So the different vaccine strategies that are out there, companies working on vaccines, are the mRNA vaccine that you're hearing about. That's the Pfizer product and the Moderna product that are the 2 candidates that will be most likely available to us first. But there's also other products, the replication defective using adenovirus vectors, whole killed virus, live attenuated viruses, purified viral protein. That's the kind of vaccines we have like for HPV or hepatitis B. And why are the mRNAs out first? Well, because they actually offer some advantages. I'm not a biochemist, but they are relatively easy to produce and manufacture. And, all of these other sorts of things involve, designing and inserting the code that you need to for that spike protein into these defective viral vectors or other viruses, or growing it out in other organisms, like with the flu vaccine where we use chicken eggs. Then you have to purify it out and get it. So a lot more steps are involved in developing these vaccines than the mRNA vaccine, which is why they have held promise, and I think a big part of why we're seeing them available now. So how does mRNA work? I know people have concerns about that. mRNA, messenger RNA, is something your body has DNA, the genetic code of life. Your DNA codes for certain things, for certain proteins, and that DNA is first made into mRNA, and then that mRNA, that messenger RNA, comes out. This is when your body makes it, and it goes through in these ribosomes, essentially, which are little organelles in your cells. See the mRNA, it's basically a little template, and that little strand, that little template tells the ribosome what protein to make, what amino acids to make. And so that's how you make proteins in your body. So this mRNA in the vaccine is surrounded by a nanoparticle of lipids, which allows it to remain stable and not break down in the vial, but also for it to get entrance into your cell. And then you have that mRNA that then is going to lead to production of that spike protein, the viral antigen that you need to recognize as foreign. And then whether it's in your muscle cell or more often in your immune cells, your body is going to take that mRNA, make that viral particle that is going to be recognized by your body as something foreign, and they're going to make antibodies against it. It's going to stimulate your T cells and your B cells, the different cells in your immune system, to not just make antibodies, but it does a whole other host of things to gear your body up to recognize that, so that if you're challenged with the actual virus, your body's going to recognize that virus and be able to fight off that infection. And that's how immunity works. So all vaccines, in one way or another, the end result is that's what we want to see. What's really interesting with the mRNA vaccines is they really seem to closely mimic a native viral infection, but you don't have to get the virus to get it. And that's obviously what we want in a vaccine. You want to get immunity without getting sick and getting COVID disease. So a couple things. This mRNA is not the virus. So you can't get COVID from it because it's not It's not a live virus. It's not a dead virus. It's just a little bit of RNA encapsulated in some lipids. The other thing, you hear rumors that it will affect your DNA somehow or your genetic code. It's RNA, it's not DNA. It cannot get into your cell nucleus where your DNA resides. mRNA it can't go in that way, so it's biologically not plausible that this chemical, that mRNA, is going to interact in any way with our DNA. One thing also to note in general, DNA vaccines present problems because to get things in across the nucleus, they generally have to use something called electroporation, which is in essence using a mild electric current to get the product into the nucleus. So that's just not happening with these vaccines. mRNA, people say it's brand new. We don't know anything about it. Well, it's a new vaccine. We've not had an mRNA vaccine for use, with authorization to be used in the public before. But this is research in mRNA vaccine is over a decade old. And what these bullets show, I took these word to word from a review article on mRNA technology and mRNA vaccines. It's a 2018 publication, so 2 years ago, long before we knew or heard of COVID-19. And what you can see when you read this is that even back then in 2018, that they had improvements in mRNA vaccines. They'd had research to help improve the delivery, the immunogenicity, and to figure out ways to overcome issues with the instability, because again, this mRNA breaks down so rapidly, and to get that delivery of mRNA into us. So there's been research on mRNA as a vaccine against flu, Zika, rabies, other things. There's also a lot of promise that these may one day be useful in combating things like cancer. So I think the point is just that it has been around for a while. Some of the big issues is that instability, and that's where that super cold freezer technology comes into play. Certainly not something that you typically use for vaccines that you want to easily get available to the entire world, but in the face of a pandemic, it's a technological issue that is really easily overcome. We can put a guy on the moon, we can keep stuff at 70 degrees below zero. So I don't think that's a big issue. I think the other thing to remind people is they worry about this stuff in their body. mRNA is not stable. Once it is in your cell, it is not going to last more than 10 or 14 days. It is not a stable molecule, and it's going to break down really pretty rapidly. So let's look, what are the phase 3 trial results? I talked about that. So here's the results on the left-hand side from the Pfizer product that was granted in EUA. So one thing, so we're 44,000 participants in that phase 3 trial. About 20,000 some people got the vaccine and 20,000 some people got a placebo. And then they followed them. And over at least 2 months of data, looking at people 7 days after they got that second dose of vaccine, they had 170 cases of COVID-19 disease, 162 in the placebo, 8 in the vaccine group. So that's the numbers that generate the data that this is 95% effective. It was effective in adults over 65. There were 10 severe cases defined as people who had severe disease, talking about people in the hospital or needed oxygen, things like that. 9 were in the placebo group, only 1 in the vaccinated group. The DSMB, that's the Data and Safety Monitoring Board, did not see any serious safety concerns with the vaccine over the time period that the vaccine's been studied, and that's what was submitted and where the EUA approval came from. The Moderna vaccine that is hopefully the next vaccine that will be available is a very similar mRNA vaccine. Their data based on, this is not final, but over this is from November 30th, they had a 94.1% efficacy. They had 196 cases of COVID, 185 in the placebo group, 11 cases in the vaccine group, 30 cases of severe disease, all of which were in the placebo group. They had 1 person who died from COVID-19 in the placebo group. The individuals came from diverse communities. They did not see any breakdown in the efficacy in different populations. It was consistent across age, race, ethnicity, and gender and demographics. Again, though, exactly how well it works in different groups, we'll learn more about that. But from what we can see from the study is it appears to be very effective. And again, this is short term. So how long does the immunity last? We don't know. We want to see it. The fact that it's 90+% effective at the start is as good as you really can hope for at the get-go, and is very promising. But how long that immunity lasts, we're all going to find that out together. This graph, I think, is a nice way of kind of just showing the efficacy. The red line here are the group and the placebo. This is day 0 is when everyone got their first injection. And you can see as the cases go up, as more and more people got sick with COVID, kind of in that straight upward trending line of continued cases of COVID in the placebo group. Here you look starting around maybe day 10 after that first dose. Here's the second dose at day 21. That purple line you're looking at that really just kind of flattens out. That is the cases of COVID in the group that actually got the vaccine. So vaccine looks to be safe and effective. Here's this poll, though, looking at the US public, and you can see in mid-August they asked, would you be interested in getting a vaccine? About 70% said yes. In early October, that number actually went down. More distrust in Black Americans, and actually people who live in rural areas tend to have more distrust as well. I think some of that, though, comes from it. Even back in early October, right, the vaccine was theoretical. There was a lot they didn't know. We hadn't seen this data, and I think it shows that the public has concerns and there's some distrust, and I think that's normal. This is a new product. It has gone through a remarkable process of being able to have this phase 3 trial done in a short period of time. And I think it's quite normal and understandable to have concerns. I'm hoping that this presentation helps address some of those concerns. I think there is also distrust out there, and I recognize that. Previous treatments that were given EUAs, like hydroxychloroquine and convalescent plasma, they were permitted to use. We know that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work and is potentially dangerous, yet people are still using it out there, and it was given an EUA way back when. There was concern, in the media that maybe the FDA was pushed or acting at the behest of the administration instead of at the behest of the American public. We know there's a long-standing distrust of vaccines in a certain segment of our population. That's nothing new. But what I want to make clear is that in the case of vaccines, the bar is set much higher, and that makes sense, right? If you or your loved one is in the ICU and they are in critical condition and it looks like they may not make it through the night, you're ready to try just about anything, right? If you're sick and now you're worried about your survival, you're willing to take a drug that might have horrible side effects and might not work because you're kind of grasping at anything. Vaccines are different. We're giving it to healthy people, so the bar needs to be a lot higher. We're giving it to people who are at risk of being infected with a deadly disease, but they're not sick yet. So the bar is much, much higher. We don't tolerate the kind of risk that we tolerate with medications, and I think we've shown that this vaccine meets those qualifications. People have asked, well, if it's so good, then why does it need an emergency use? I think that creates some concerns that it hasn't been vetted appropriately. Why isn't it just getting licensed? Well, that's a great question. But vaccines are licensed after they've completed the phase 3 trials, but and those involve, again, thousands of people. But in general, that it takes several years of following those phase 3 trials. They're going to follow things out for a couple years. We don't have that kind of time here. But what we do have is the people who got the vaccine were followed on average of over 2 months. And what we know with adverse events from vaccines, with current vaccines and vaccines in the past, Even rare but serious adverse events generally occur within 6 weeks of getting that vaccine. So in the case of other vaccines in the past, where they saw, reports of Guillain-Barré or immune-mediated, nervous disorders or blood disorders, neurologic disorders, arthritis that you can see following things like the MMR vaccine. They don't happen very often, but they can happen. They are noted to be a serious adverse effect. But those generally occur within 6 weeks, which biologically makes sense because you get injected with something, your body reacts to it in a few weeks. If you're going to have an untoward reaction that's going to stimulate your immune system, you're going to see that within 6 weeks, 2 months' time in the vast majority of cases. That said, could there be things that happen later? And could there be rare but serious adverse events that are just so rare that they haven't seen it yet? If it involves more than 20 or 30,000 people, if it's a 1 in 100,000 or 1 in a million, we maybe don't know about it yet. And that's why long-term surveillance is going to be important, and it's going to be ongoing. I think the other thing people should recognize is to get that emergency use authorization, it's not just based on a single group or the pharmaceutical company or the FDA. They have committees. The VRBPAC, the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, is the group that meets and reviews all of the data of those phase 3 trials and recommends granting the EUA. That group consists of many experts in the field and they're not just members of pharmaceutical companies or the government. And it includes a lot of academic practicing scientists from many different fields as well as consumers. The data was also reviewed by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. That is also a very diverse group, and they're the ones who vote to give recommendation to use the vaccine, what the prioritization of those vaccines are. And so that same process happened with these EUAs than what would happen in the use of a typical vaccine product. Albeit it's been in a real rapid fashion for sure, but the same processes have been followed, and I feel very comfortable with that. Again, if there are very rare effects that are going to happen in 1 in a million people, we're not going to know about that right now, and we're going to continue to monitor that. How do they do that? The VAERS and VSD are systems that have been long-standing to monitor for adverse events from vaccines. The VAERS, anyone can report to that, and that's where we can start getting reports of potential adverse events that we may not know about. The VSD, the Vaccine Safety Data Link, is a link of many very large healthcare systems that can not only report adverse events, but we can quickly look at the rates of those adverse events to compare it to people who weren't vaccinated to see if those risks are greater in the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group. These systems have been in use for a while and they work. It's how we found out about things like intussusception with the first rotavirus vaccine, and how we learn about potentially rare side effects. The CDC is also rolling out this V-Safe program. You're going to hear about that. Anyone who's vaccinated are asked to sign up for that. And then if you do sign up for that, you are going to get text messages, daily check-ins the first week, and then weekly check-ins so that you can enter how you're feeling, any potential side effects, anything whatsoever. And then when you get the second one, they'll reset it. And that's going to help collect data. That's a voluntary thing. We're asking people to do it. It's just going to be one more way that they can rapidly get data on the vaccine. So that said, what are some of the precautions to getting the vaccine? Lots of questions about that. Well, the vaccine, and because we want to know about potential side effects and we don't want to confuse things, the recommendation is to get the vaccine by itself instead of with other vaccines. If you are in line to get other things like a flu shot or a shingles shot or a Tdap or whatever else, I think the recommendation is to separate this vaccine with any other vaccine by 14 days on both ends. The Pfizer vaccine is a 2-dose, separated by 21 days. My understanding is that it's going to be plus or minus 4 days to get that second dose. More to come on that. The Moderna, there's a 28-day separation between the first and second dose. If people are in isolation because they have COVID, or they are waiting for a test result, or they're a probable case, or if they're quarantined, they should defer and wait until they're no longer contagious or they're out of quarantine. If it's a resident of a congregate care setting in quarantine, they can be vaccinated. They already have people taking care of them anyways. You're not taking them to a public setting. What if you already had COVID? People who've had COVID but are out of their isolation period and feeling better can get the vaccine. There is no hard and fast rule here. I think the recommendation is that they can consider deferring for 90 days. That would really be an individual decision. Most people who get COVID are not going to get it again in the next 90 days. So someone who had COVID may want to wait and defer vaccination to maximize their potential immunity. But again, there's no clear recommendation for that. If people got a monoclonal antibody or they got convalescent plasma, then you would want to wait 90 days, because those medications containing antibody against COVID would most likely interfere with the effectiveness of the vaccine, so you would want to wait and defer then. People, we say this for anyone, if you have moderate or severe illness, you should wait until you're feeling better. You don't have to be completely better, but if you're sick for whatever reason, we'd wait until you're feeling better to get the vaccine. Pregnancy and breastfeeding, we don't have a whole lot of data. There's nothing in the vaccine that would be a contraindication to breastfeeding or to pregnant women. It's not a live virus vaccine. There's nothing in the vaccine. The ingredients in the vaccine would not be a contraindication if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, because there's really nothing in it. There's no preservatives. There's nothing of concern. However, if you're pregnant, we know that if you get a high fever, that can be a concern and a potential problem for someone in different stages of their pregnancy, and that is a potential side effect of the vaccine. So I think women who are pregnant need to weigh the potential risks and the potential benefits of that vaccine depending on their individual circumstance. And that's something they can talk to their healthcare provider about and weigh that decision. But pregnancy is not a contraindication. Someone who has allergies to bee stings, to shellfish, to peanuts, to any food, to any oral medication is not a precaution. They can safely get this vaccine. Someone who has had a severe allergic reaction, so someone who's had like an anaphylactic reaction to an injectable medication, so someone who got a shot of something and had a really severe reaction, needed epinephrine, those people generally know who they are. They can still get the vaccine, but the recommendation is to observe them for 30 minutes. And just like any other vaccine product, if we're giving it, we need to be prepared to handle an anaphylactic reaction. That said, again, what's in the vaccine? People ask me that. There are no preservatives in the vaccine. The vaccine has the mRNA. It has the lipids that provide that nanoparticle. They're different ingredients. You can read them. The one in there is polyethylene glycol, PEG. That is found in a lot of foods. It's found in other medications that are used regularly. It's an ingredient in Miralax, which is treated, what you take before your colonoscopy or for constipation, and is in this as well. I've never heard of anyone being allergic to PEG, but if they were, then that would be a contraindication, because the only contraindication to this vaccine is if they've had an anaphylactic reaction to the vaccine or to a component of the vaccine. And again, there's just not a whole lot in there. The salts are like sodium chloride, potassium chloride, really things you can't be allergic to. So there really are very few people who would have a true contraindication to this vaccine. What are the side effects? You probably heard a lot about that. It's pretty typical for a vaccine that stimulates an immune response. In general, people under the age of 55 have a more robust immune system. They respond better to vaccines in general, so they see more side effects in the younger population than in older, and it's more common in the second dose than in the first dose. Again, makes sense. Your body's already primed. They get that second dose. We want it to have a stronger reaction because we want a good, robust, strong immune response. So it makes sense that you would have more side effects with that second dose. By far, the most common reported side effect is pain at the injection site. You can also get some redness and swelling. Maybe I'm a wimp, but I get pain at the injection site from pretty much anything that gets, anything that you inject in me, I tend to get soreness from. Flu shots, tetanus shots, you name it. Other things that we see more commonly with this, and perhaps more than other vaccines, would be things like fatigue. People are just tired, they just don't feel well. Headaches, muscle aches, myalgia, chills and fever. That happens in a significant portion, and in the younger people on the second dose, as much as 50 or 60% of the people are going to report some of those symptoms. For those of you who've gotten shingles, like myself, the rates are even higher with that vaccine with these similar reported side effects. Even a higher percentage of people get that. I certainly did. Spent a day not feeling that great after my first dose and after my second dose. I can't say I was looking forward to it or was happy about it, but I was darn glad to get those and complete the series and protect myself from shingles. I really have the same attitude with this vaccine. The side effects, when they do occur within the first 48 hours, usually kind of 1 to 2 days later. The soreness can start sooner. And generally they resolve in 24 hours is typical, 2 to 3 days at the longest. Again, looking at over 2 months, at least 2 months of safety data for the people in the trials, we've not seen any adverse effects other than these side effects. There have been the serious adverse events that were reported were statistically no different than what you'd see in the general population or in the group that got the placebo. Again, I think it's going to be important that we continue to monitor that because there could be things that aren't apparent now that we're going to see later on. They didn't see any concerns with serious adverse events when they looked within specific groups due to age, race, sex, or underlying medical conditions. So I think one of the messages too is that even if you do get some of these side effects with your first dose, tough it out, get that second dose. Because what we know is that 2 doses provides excellent protection. We can't tell you anything about 1 dose. So it's really important that we get people to complete the series. What don't we know? Let's be honest, there's things we don't know. We don't know how long it lasts. Will you need a booster? I don't know. Will it be every year? Will it be every couple years? Will the COVID virus mutate and we'll have to change the makeup of it slightly like we do with the flu? I don't know those answers to those. I think the fact that we got such high efficacy, after 2 months, which is when you'd expect that kind of peak efficacy, but for that to be in that 95% range makes me think that this is going to last a while. And whether we need a booster or how often we need a booster, I don't know, but I think this is a darn good start. We don't know if it prevents you from being infected and spreading it. We know it prevents disease. So whether you got vaccinated or not, masks are going to be important. Social distancing is going to be important. Whether you are vaccinated or not, it does not give you a party hardy card where you get to ignore all the recommendations just because you were vaccinated. We're not out of the woods there yet, and we're all going to have to continue to practice all of those non-pharmaceutical interventions. Again, are there potentially very rare side effects that could be serious? They are there, and that's why we have this robust monitoring. I think the allergic reactions that you probably heard about in the UK when they started vaccinating people, that shows you that it works. Here was something that was not a concern. They got a few. We don't know. It may end up being nothing, but the fact that it happened, that it was reported, and you're reading about it across the pond here, makes me feel better that the system is working to monitor for these things. Pregnancy, again, we don't have great data on that, but it is ongoing. Again, it's not a contraindication. There's nothing in the vaccine specifically that concerns me, but we don't have great data. Pediatric use, the same thing. We don't have data. They will be looking at that. And I would hope that we would have good pediatric data before any recommendation to use in people under the age of 16. What about people who are immunocompromised because of their condition or medications? A lot of people have asked me about that. Well, one thing is, I don't think there's any, it's not a live virus, so there's no concern about someone who's immunocompromised getting the vaccine and having adverse effects from it. But it may not work as well. That would be true with any vaccine, right? So anyone who's immunocompromised tends to respond less well to vaccines in general. But we also know that these persons who are immunocompromised are at increased risk. So any potential benefit for them is going to be, well deserved for sure. But there's still not enough data to give you clear guidance on that. That's something that's going to come out. At this point, I would fully recommend vaccinating people who are immunocompromised, but I'm not going to give you any guarantees on it. One other thing we don't know, the interchangeable between different vaccines with other products, you can get a different brand of Hep B vaccine for your first dose, your second dose, and your third dose, and it still counts. With these, we have no data. So until we do, the recommendation is to stick with the same brand. What I've been told is if you do end up getting a Pfizer product first and the Moderna second, that's a vaccine error, but you don't get a third dose. How well will that work? We don't know. So again, what we're trying to do and what people need to do is to get the same brand. You got to finish with what you started with. And that's the end of my presentation. And if you have questions, I would ask you to reach out to me. You can call me, you can email me. I want to be available to you. I know people have their own questions. Everybody has their unique kind of circumstances. Some of the questions I got in previous with District 4, again, questions about people who are immunocompromised. That is not a contraindication. People who are on medications for autoimmune disease are not a contraindication or even a precaution to this. It is not a live virus. You cannot get COVID from it. You can't get an infection from it, so you don't have to worry about that. People ask me about egg allergies. There's no eggs in this. Eggs had nothing to do, thank goodness, with making it. Egg and other food allergies have, at this point, there's no recommendations to do anything differently. We will be giving this vaccine and be prepared to handle, a reaction to the vaccine, no matter who the person is or what their history is. That's why we are always prepared to handle and treat anaphylaxis. And that would be no different, of course, with this vaccine. People asked, if you get the vaccine, will you still have to quarantine if you're exposed? At this point, I would say yes, you do, because 95% is great, but it's not 100%. And we are not at this point ready to change any of our guidance or recommendations on the non-pharmaceutical interventions based on the vaccine. Priority groups, I think you can look at that, but again, our first focus here is on the essential healthcare providers, EMS providers. That's that group 1A. Then we'll be moving to 1B, the essential workers, which is a huge group of people. And I recognize that we have lots and lots and lots of people whose jobs are essential to our everyday life. Whether it's the people who check you out at the grocery store, or your teachers, or your public safety officers. I mean, everyone's job is important, and it's hard to have to prioritize one group over another, but that's the situation we're in. It by no means, to me, means that someone is more important than someone else. but it's a process. We're going to follow the recommendations that have been come down from the ACIP and the state, and as best as we're able, we're going to follow those prioritization guidelines. I think they were well thought out. They're a group that had very difficult decisions to make, and I think they did a good job of weighing all of the risks and benefits with the goal to maximize the number of lives saved. And that's the process we're going to be going through going forward. It's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. This is going to be a huge challenge, and that's what we have to look forward to. So I'm excited about it. I can't wait to get vaccinated, and I can't wait to start down a path out of this national nightmare. So thank you very much.